Republic F-105 Thunderchief. The Thunderchief was built big and heavy, built for a purpose, built for Vietnam. And when one went down in that war, it didn't spiral, it didn't glide. It hit the ground with a bone-rattling thud that echoed through the jungle. That's where the name came from. Pilots flying combat missions started calling it the Thud, spoken with dark humor and resignation. It stuck hard. Not because they didn't respect the jet, they did. But names born in combat zones don't lie. When your multi-million-dollar fighter is nicknamed after the sound it makes hitting Earth, you're telling the world something about your odds. The Thunderchief served faithfully, delivered ordnance without question, but the Thud? That was the truth. Convair F-102 Delta Dagger. The Delta Dagger had a troubled beginning. Early pilots looked at it and asked themselves hard questions. Questions like, should this thing have even left the drawing board? The design was unconventional, the performance was questionable, so the crews gave it a nickname that wasn't mean-spirited. It was the sound of relief. One wonder, said with raised eyebrows and a slight smirk, as in, one wonder it actually flies. The jet flew, it served, but that nickname never tried to be anything more than acknowledgement of its own improbability. In aviation, sometimes surviving your own design is victory enough. McDonnell F-101 Voodoo. The Voodoo had dark magic in its development cycle. Early variants seemed cursed. Engines quit, systems failed. Pilots weren't convinced the aircraft possessed any business being in the sky. So they called it the Voodoo, not because it was mystical or powerful, but because it seemed possessed by forces that worked against it. The name wasn't respectful, it was honest. The jet eventually matured, it became capable, but the Voodoo name stuck because it remembered what pilots felt when they first flew it. Uncertainty mixed with a willingness to get back in the cockpit anyway. That's what real Voodoo feels like. Lockheed F-104 Starfighter. Tiny wings, ridiculous wing loading, a fuselage that was all engine and nothing else. The Starfighter looked like a dart thrown point first at the ground, and that's exactly what it did. Point the nose down, and gravity took care of the rest. Recovery? Almost impossible. The Luftwaffe lost over 100 of them. The nickname was Lawn Dart, and it wasn't a joke. It was a warning written in scorched earth and wreckage. Small wings built for speed meant no lift. No lift meant certain situations were death. The Starfighter had incredible performance, but it earned its nickname in blood and aluminum. Republic F-84 Thunderjet. Heavy airframe, underpowered engine, a climb rate that made pilots visibly age on the way up. The Thunderjet wasn't fast, wasn't nimble, wasn't fun to fly. Ground crews and pilots made absolutely sure everyone knew it. They called it the lead sled almost immediately, heavy, sluggish, requiring all your strength to move. The name followed the jet through every theater, every conflict, every mission. It was honest. If nothing else, the lead sled was honest about what you were sitting in. Sometimes, honesty is all you get. Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-23. Variable sweep wings were cutting edge in the 1970s. Fold them back for speed, spread them wide for lift. Clever engineering. The MiG-23 was a serious multi-role fighter, at least that's what Soviet engineers intended. But Western pilots had different ideas. They latched onto the variable geometry and called it the swinger, not affectionately. The Soviets built capability, the West turned it into a punchline. Technical achievement met Cold War mockery, and the mockery won the naming rights.
Eurofighter Typhoon. One of the most advanced swing-wing fighters on Earth. A 90 million euro technological marvel, German Luftwaffe crews looked at it and asked themselves, what do we call this? They settled on something simple. Das Flug, the plane. Translation, the plane. That's it. No poetry, no drama, just the plane. Whether that's admirable minimalism or a quiet insult has never been officially resolved, but it's hard to argue it isn't funny when your jet costs that much and gets called the plane. Dassault Mirage F1. The swept-wing profile reminded French ground crews of something familiar, something they used every day. A broom. So that's what they called it. Laval, the broom. Once someone said it out loud, there was no taking it back. The Mirage F1 was an excellent fighter, capable, reliable, effective in combat, but its nickname? Decidedly less fierce, sweeping across the sky, carrying the name of a household tool. The jet earned far more than its nickname ever could have suggested, but the broom is what the people flying it chose to call it, and sometimes that means everything. Saab JS-39 Gripen. Swedish pilots started calling it the grasshopper early in its service life. Small, quick, built to leap from dispersed highway strips rather than traditional airfields. The comparison made tactical sense, but grasshoppers are things you step on. For a world-class light fighter, the Gripen deserved better than a nickname that undersells everything about it. Yet there it sits, the grasshopper, a name that captures capability but somehow makes you want to crush it. North American F-86 Sabre. The Sabre is rightly celebrated as a Korean War legend, a genuine milestone in aviation history, a fighter that changed air combat forever. But pilots flying heavy loadouts or experiencing less crisp handling than advertised started calling it the Hog. Heavy, demanding, not elegant. The name circulated widely enough to stick with the aircraft long after the complaining stopped. Even icons aren't immune to unflattering nicknames from the people who flew them. The Hog represents the Sabre's burden, not its glory. Mikhail Gurevich MiG-21. China acquired MiG-21 technology in the early 1960s and built their own version, the J-7. Years of development, countless improvements, but in Western aviation circles, the nickname never changed. The copy. Not the clone, not the variant. The copy. Blunt, accurate. For a jet China spent years developing further, it was an assessment that proved very hard to outrun. The J-7 became capable, but it never escaped being called the copy. Sukhoi S-7. Heavy airframe, underpowered engine, fuel consumption that defied belief. The Sukhoi was called the Beast, not because it was powerful or fearsome, but because it was a beast to refuel, a beast to maintain, a beast to feed. Demanding, unforgiving, exhausting. When ground crews called it the Beast at the end of a very long day, it wasn't admiration, it was frustration. The Sukhoi flew, it fought, but it exhausted everyone who kept it flying. McDonnell F-3H Demon. McDonnell named it the Demon. Sounded powerful, sounded menacing, but the sailors flying it off carrier decks called it the Whale. Early variants were so underpowered that the jet's considerable weight made the jet's launch an act of faith, a whale on a runway, large, slow, hard to maneuver. Carrier crews voted for accuracy every time. The Demon on paper, the Whale in reality. Hawker Hunter. One of the most beautiful jets ever built. Sleek lines, elegant profile, a masterpiece of aviation design, and one of the most aggravating to work on. The fuel and hydraulic lines ran through the airframe in a layout that maintenance crews called the plumber's nightmare. The routing was complex, access was poor. The nickname stayed with the aircraft for its entire service life. Beauty on the outside, nightmare inside. The Hunter proved that elegance and practicality don't always coexist in the same fuselage. English Electric Lightning. It climbed like nothing else in the Royal Air Force. Straight up, supersonic, gone. Crews called it the Frightening, and the name cut both ways. The Lightning was frightening in performance, incredible acceleration, unmatched climb rate. But the Lightning was also frightening in its fuel consumption, alarming. Its handling margins were tight. Its accident record was sobering. The Frightening was equal parts admiration and genuine concern. Both were fully warranted. General Dynamics F-111 Aardvark. Before anyone called it the Aardvark, crews had already settled on something simpler. The Pig. Large, heavy, unconventional, stubborn on the ground. That said, it could fly low and fast in the dark and deliver weapons with precision that nothing else could match at the time. A pig, yes, but one that flew very, very well. The nickname captured both its ungainly appearance and its extraordinary capability. The Aardvark name came later, but the pig came from the heart. Northrop F-5 Freedom Fighter. The United States Air Force ran a Vietnam combat evaluation of the F-5 under a program they named Skoshi Tiger, Skoshi being mangled Japanese for small. They officially named their combat trial after how tiny the aircraft was. The F-5 went on to become one of the most exported fighters in history. Its introduction did not suggest that outcome. From a small beginning came enormous influence. The F-5 proved that size isn't everything. Sometimes small is enough. IAI Kafir. The Kafir was capable when it entered Israeli service in the mid-1970s, but by the time export operators were flying it years later, the design was aging. Crews weren't subtle about it. They called it the geriatric, not affectionately. It was a maintenance log given a nickname, a calendar of wear and tear. Later variants improved things significantly, but the name had already done its damage. The geriatric represented not the jet's current reality, but memories of its past. Chengdu J-7. China acquired MiG-21 technology in the early 1960s and built their own version. The J-7 served for decades, exported widely, flew in air forces across the world. But in Western aviation circles, the nickname never changed. The copy. Not the clone, not the variant, not the improvement, the copy. It was blunt, it was accurate, and for a jet China spent years developing further, it was an assessment that proved very hard to outrun. Technical achievement could not escape the shadow of its origins. McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II. One of the most capable fighters ever built, multi-role, heavily armed, proven in combat across decades, and crews called it double ugly. The drooped nose, the bent wingtips, the sheer bulk of it sitting on the ground, nothing about the Phantom was graceful to look at. It was also called the flying brick, called the rhino, but double ugly was the one that stuck because it required no explanation the moment you laid eyes on it. Capability wrapped in an unconventional package, the Phantom proved that beauty and effectiveness don't need to go together. Gloucester Meteor. Britain's first operational jet fighter, a genuine milestone in aviation history, it carried a nickname that said everything about its safety record, the meat box. Early variants were unstable, engine failures were common, the accident rate was alarming enough that crews stopped pretending otherwise. The Meteor was real, it was significant, but it was also, by the frank assessment of the people flying it, a box that occasionally turned into meat. Progress came with a cost. The nickname remembered that cost. Sepacat Jaguar. Officially, it was a precise, capable strike aircraft, built for a purpose, designed for performance. Unofficially, Royal Air Force pilots called it the Jag, and they didn't bother spelling it. Early reliability problems, lack of power on single-engine approaches, a general distrust of the aircraft's margins. It earned the name Fast, which is to say, it broke. The Jaguar improved significantly over its service life. The nickname, as nicknames do, refused to follow suit. Sometimes a name sticks not because it's accurate forever, but because it was accurate when it mattered most.